evening, everyone. Welcome back to for another segment of Pen Connect with Women Authors. This month, the month of March, being the International Women's Month, we are celebrating this month with women authors who have made their space in the field of writing. In this specific field, they are championing themselves, and we are looking forward to share a few words with them so that we can understand their world, how they go ahead and perceive nonfiction genre in India, and what do they see as the potential of writing in this genre going to be in the coming years. Today's session specifically is called The Potential and Scope of Nonfiction India, and it is going to be moderated by my very dear friend, Chandrika Krishnan. Chandrika is a Bangalore-based writer and educationist, and she likes all things beginning with a T, talking, teaching, tales, and tea. Her 200-odd published articles, poems, and stories are eclectic and mostly experiential and are published both in print and online media. She is a published author, and her collection of flash fictions was published recently, titled Vignettes, A Slice of Life. Her stories feature in many anthologies, but what she loves doing more is volunteering whenever possible at a local hospital and a Seva center that feeds the poor. I welcome you, Chandrika, to this session, and let's just go head on and introduce our panelists, our wonderful panelists who are going to go ahead and speak to us about the potential and scope of nonfiction in India. Thank you.
Thank you, Kajal. Thanks a lot for this opportunity. Okay, here we go. Hi, hello, everyone. We are going to welcome three people onto the show, and this is going to be the potential and scope of nonfiction writing in India. I'm going to read about Pragya Bhatt in her own words. I was born in Delhi and raised all across the world as my father was a diplomat in the Indian Foreign Service. Being in countries as diverse as Yemen, Pakistan, US, etc., made life very interesting, but where I was constantly on the move. To combat this peripatetic life, I think I fell in love with books. I read my way through about 10 countries, that many schools, one pointless engineering college, and 8.5 years of monotonous corporate job. By the end of this, I was overweight and had back pain and insomnia thrown in for a good measure. I discovered yoga in the quest to become healthy again, and 15 years later, here I am a practitioner of yoga and a teller of yoga myth. Welcome, Pragya, and her book, Beyond Asanas, The Myths and Legends Beyond Yogic Posture. It's available on Amazon. I browsed through your website, Pragya, and I had a mighty catch for the rest of the day. I just browsed it. I just looked at your photos. And I think I had to take rest for the next 2 days. But anyway, welcome, and we are all
Thank you so
looking
much.
forward to hearing about you.
Thank you so
Now,
much, Chandrika.
the next guest is Sandhya. She's a dreamer, a writer, a globetrotter. She enjoys pottering around her home and a garden in Bangalore with her human and feline adopted babies. She is a best-selling author of two books, a beautifully illustrated children's book, Mia Finds Her Home, under the pen name Sandy, and co-author of her father's autobiography, Verma to Bangalore. She is a season 7 alumni of Anita Nayar's writing workshop. She likes to create miniature scenes and watch clouds, not at the same time. She currently heads a technical communication team in an MNC and is an inclusion and diversity champion. A website, varnika.co. Welcome, Sandhya, and I look forward to today's session, and I'm sure it is going to be one wonderful session listening to you all. Nice having you here. I think you have to speak a little louder. I can't hear you.
Thank you so much. It is lovely to.
Now we have Mona Verma. She is an award-winning author of 8 works of fiction and numerous anthologies. She had edited various science journals, self-help books, biographies, and is a regular feature writer for online newspaper and specializes in haiku and limericks. Her books have been the subject of thesis for many research scholars and ICSC ELT series. She co-owns Disha, a corporate training firm that is much sought by leading MNCs, PSUs, corporate houses, and universities for faculty training, PEP and PSI programs, and is the chief coordinator for FLO FICCI, Uttarakhand Literature Committee. Welcome, Mona.
Thank
And
you, Chandrika.
looking at the long list of what you do, I think I have to take a breath now, deep breath, in order to get back my. It's
You are very kind
amazing,
and generous.
amazing having you all over here. And so we begin. I think Sandhya's book and yours, I think Laughter Lines and Foods of India, Fasting Foods, etc. Mona, besides
Yes,
your fiction.
yes.
Okay.
Yes, lots of
One,
fiction and non-fiction, historical
yes.
fiction.
I was looking through your profiles, all of yours, and one thing which is common among all three of you is you have sort of transitioned from fiction to non-fiction, right? At least Sandhya and you and Pragya, I think you are into reading quite a bit.
Yes, and
So,
originally I started writing poetry and not so much into nonfiction. And it is only after
okay.
discovering yoga that I actually got into nonfiction.
Okay. So, what made you transition and how did you find the transitioning?
I think for me, the transition was pretty natural. As I went into more things which I was interested in. Yoga was my passion, and it's also a form of art. And the more I delved into it, I found that I was still surrounded by people who were, still living that 9 to 5 boxed kind of life. And it was very natural for me to kind of want to communicate about what I was experiencing and the things that I was discovering. And that's how the nonfiction started. That's how the blogging started. That's how I started writing articles which were basically about yoga, trying to introduce it to the people who were around me, who were more I think who were more open to reading about yoga. They were not so much into reading fiction or maybe myths about yoga, mythology about yoga. They were more into reading it about it from a subject point of view, which is what happens when you're in a corporate kind of setting. So I think mine was pretty much because of that. I was transitioning my career, and I saw that nonfiction had more was more approachable to a lot of people, and hence I started writing nonfiction.
Okay. And what about you, Mona? I think you have written quite a few fictions, right? Quite,
Yes.
I think, about half a dozen or a little more, or that's what I noticed.
Yes, Chandrika, thank you for that question. And I so agree with Pragya when she talks about how fiction and non-fiction are different from each other and where they can be applied more suitably. Well, for me, as a writer of both fiction as well as non-fiction, I believe for writers and readers alike, it's sometimes very hard to tell the difference between fiction and non-fiction sometimes, even as a writer, I feel. Because in general, fiction refers to the plot, the setting, the characters, and they are created from your imagination. Whereas when it comes to non-fiction, it refers to the factual stories and focused on the actual events and people. So the elements in both are same, right? It's a plot, it's a setting, and it is a character. And for me, how delved into non-fiction from fiction was when I basically read In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. So it's widely regarded as one of the best works of non-fiction to, significantly it blurred the line between fiction and non-fiction. Since his descriptions and detailing of the events were so rich and evocative. Like, I don't know if everybody, all our viewers out there would know about this particular book. It's about a man called Herb Clutter who stays in a farm with his family. And there were these two ex-convicts who come to loot the farm, and in the bid to do so, they end up murdering the entire family. And now this writer, The writer Truman Capote actually was not the part of the entire setting, but he read about the murders in the newspaper, in the New York Times article, and took his very close friends, no less than Harper Lee, to the village to interview many of the people who had heard about it or who were part of the entire setting. But when he wrote the book, neither Capote nor Lee they figure anywhere in the book. Instead, he tells you in a very rich, in a very vivid, in a very dramatic manner as to what happened over there. So I think when I read that book, I said, my God, neither can I say it is fiction, neither can I say it is non-fiction, how the boundaries have been blurred, and how any writer, when the story goes into the hands of any skilled author, these lines just blur. So I started using lots of storytelling, lots of elements of fiction to write non-fiction. This is how I started.
Non-fiction. Okay. Sandhya, I think the first book of yours was a children's illustrated book, right?
Yes, that's right. So yeah, my journey was rather different. I've always been more interested in writing fiction, adult fiction. But since I work full time, I'm a single mom. It's been on and off over the years. So when my daughter Tarana, she's also a T. I think they said you like things with T. So yes, Tarana. I adopted her about 10 years ago. So yeah, I wrote a little story for her on how I brought her home. And then she was asking me, are there other people, who are there others also who came home the same way? So I have cats. I have two cats. So I was like, yeah, Mia took your sisters. I brought them home too. So I wrote a little story of how Mia came home. And, my friend Piali, who was working with me, she always wanted to illustrate children's books. So we just sort of started doing this just as a bedtime story for her, right? So I think, and I showed it to her and she loved it. And we accidentally published it on Kindle. This was the days when Kindle just started, and we were like, oh, we've heard of this. And we started into it, and before we knew it, we were published. All right. So that's how the first children's book happened. But all along in the background, I was still writing my adult fiction book. And then my father, I think he wrote his life story, right, on he recently turned 88, and he was ailing for a while. He had cancer, which he beat. He was an army officer, and I think always a soldier, always a fighter. But that day he decided to write his life story, and then he wrote it. And then I just read it. I started getting interested, and then I was like, I wanted to know more details on some of the stories, and I also wanted to see how can it be more engaging to all generations in the family, right, from the the great grandchildren to everybody, to people who are not so close to the family, perhaps. So I just picked up some stories and started writing it, and he liked it. So I started, writing his autobiography. And when he was in hospital, I used to I accompanied him to a few chemotherapy sessions. And so I would ask questions, he would tell me more details on the stories. I would write it, and then, he would review it. And it's like, okay, this is good. So yeah, otherwise it's a long time just spending in the hospital. So this was a good way to pass the time.
Yeah.
And before we knew it, we had, completed his autobiography. It was Verma to Bangalore, and which got published on his 88th birthday. So I think that was great. Um, Again, I was talking to Suhail Mathur from the Book Bakers, and he was asking me what happened to my fiction book because I was working with him on that. Then I told him, like, see, this came along the way, and I'm working on this. And he actually said he's someone who has a real pulse on the book market, and he said there is a huge non-fiction market right now.
Yeah.
We try looking for a publisher, and we got it. So I think, as
Wonderful.
mentioning, I think all these life stories and true life events, huge
Correct.
market for all of that right now.
Yeah. Actually, Mona had raised a very pertinent thing that you have stories everywhere. Like, for example, from the newspaper, from people around you, and all that. But going forward, this I'm just throwing it open. Anyone can take the answer, and then we can continue. Uh, Research. How important is research in the field of when you are planning your non-fiction? How do you like, as a first step, what do you plan? How do you plan as a non-fiction, as a first step?
Okay, just sorry,
Anyone?
just
Yes,
in talking about the. So this is more of a life story, right? So and yeah, I think it's such an opportunity for everybody, and especially writers, because if you're searching for inspiration, the characters are there, as Mona said, the plot is there, is there.
and round, right, around. And what about you, Mona? Like when you said that, what inspired you? So, do you also sort of keep a watch on what's happening around you and try to find ideas from what's happening?
Yes, of course, Chandrika. Because writing is very cathartic, be it fiction, be it non-fiction. And, because I have written lots of historical fiction, so that makes me like sort of a, chutney, like a mixer grinder of facts and fantasy put together. And of course, whole lot of research goes into it. But when we when we do the research on a particular topic, and then we are writing the book or writing the story, we don't have to sound very researched, right? We have to turn it into a story in such a way that it does not sound very didactic, but yes,
Yes,
whole lot of research goes in, because when we are writing historical fiction, or you're writing mythology, or when I wrote Banaras, Lost and Found in Banaras,
yes,
I felt that when you're writing on these topics, you are hefting a very heavy responsibility on your shoulders. You
correct,
cannot lead your readers astray. You cannot even fool them. It is a very logical generation these days that is reading your work. So it's not as if any hogwash that you hear from anywhere that you can put into your stories. This is the era of the GPS, and you cannot be talking about gingerbread house anymore. And
correct,
secondly, I feel that there is nothing called fiction, as everything is experience. And
correct,
experience differs from person to person. And one's non-fiction could be other person's fantasy. But whatever idea that you have in your head, it has to be researched. You need to be sure about what you're going to write. What is the epicenter of the topic? And then start moving around it. And also, your research is not only the Google research or bookish research, you also need to understand the undocumented human narratives.
mm,
That is a very
absolutely,
vital part of my research per se. Because
okay,
what people tell you, the stories that people tell you, when I wrote on the partition, God is a River, or when I wrote about Banaras, I spoke to people who were
correct.
part of the stories and whose stories I was going to write. But then the mantra at the end is, if it reports the truth, it is non-fiction. But if it stretches the truth, it becomes fiction.
Fiction.
But yes,
Wonderful.
research is important.
I think that's a beautiful
So,
statement.
yeah. So
Pragya, when, yeah,
I'd like to add to that. So, like Mona said, today the readers are very logical. You cannot really fool them. You cannot just give anything to them, to consume. But today readers are also very well read, and
Yes.
a challenge that I faced when I was writing my book was that there are so many versions. The myths, our culture and our mythology, it's so huge and it's so vast. And there are as many views on a story as there are people. So I think an important thing for an author to do, especially if they're looking at writing nonfiction, and especially things which can potentially get very controversial, such as mythology. And like
Oh,
yoga is
yes.
a buzzword today. Everyone does yoga and everyone knows yoga. And frequently as yoga teachers, I get told by a lot of people what yoga is. So keeping
correct,
all of that in mind, I think it's very important for people to read widely. So like Mona
absolutely,
said, it's not only about like nonfiction. A lot of fiction can also be looked at as nonfiction. So in my research for mythology, I was not only reading translations of texts, but I was also reading fiction, about mythological fiction by other writers, to get that point of view, to get
Yeah.
more of a
wonderful,
holistic idea about the subject. So I think research also includes reading a wide array of literature about your topic, and you cannot sort of confine yourself to fiction, non-fiction, biography, etc.,
yeah,
etc. You just have to read
correct.
widely. Yeah.
But coming
Spot
to
on.
you, Pragya, this is technically, see, there are so many books about yoga out there. So
Yes.
why do you zone in on, okay, let me now focus on this particular aspect of it? What made you come to that particular decision?
So at the time I decided to, write the book, I'd been practicing yoga for a long time. I'd say, probably like more than a decade. And most yoga practitioners, after the first 3 years of asana practice, you start to question the philosophy of yoga, and that's when you start to read a lot more.
Okay.
By my third or fourth year of yoga practice, I had started to read all kinds of things. So again, a lot of like translations of yogic texts, a lot of books by other writers, and after I had sort of read across genres for yoga as well, I realized that there's really nothing that links the practice as we know today, like the practice of asana, to where it's coming from, to its origin in mythology. So, these days it's very common to have people doing something like, let's say, the Vishwamitrasana, and not to really know or even be able to pronounce Vishwamitra. So that's okay. I'm not going to hold practitioners accountable for this, but I did realize that there were a lot of practitioners who wanted to go beyond the superficial yoga that is up for consumption right now. They wanted to go beyond that, and I wanted to provide some information which I wanted when I was starting out. Something to add value to a domain which is already so flooded, with all kinds of yoga related materials. So I saw that there was a lack.
Yeah. So that is the main thing. The whole thing is we are finding the scope. Where do I take my story in, right? So that is, I think that's going to be your first challenge of what I'm going to find the story in a non-fiction, right? So how do you that's the process. So how do you decide that, okay, this might have a place in our country in the particular, let me
Right.
focus on that particular thing. How do you decide on those things?
So I think it's. I think, see, like a lot more people are writing now, and a lot of it has a lot to do with like women's position in society as well.
Correct.
Women now have a voice, and we have platforms for that voice. It's more now than, let's say, 2 decades ago, where there was, there were less avenues for women to express themselves. But now women are leading very different lives, and they have a voice, and they want to express themselves. And therefore, a lot of women are writing from the heart, whether it's nonfiction or fiction. I wrote about yoga because it was something so close to my heart.
Yeah.
I am a practitioner, I am a teacher, and I found what I thought would be useful. Like I found something, which I thought would resonate with others as well. Other people who were also on the path of yoga. So similarly, I feel that, people who are grappling with an issue, or people who have been, let's say, victims of something, women nowadays, they are very vocal. They want to talk about their experiences. They want to share their experiences so that we can collectively sort of help each other out. There's a lot of that because of social media, the positive points of social media. So I think that's how initially the scope gets established, that this is who I am. And then you write from a space which is very personal to you. And that's where the authenticity kind of comes into the work that you put out there, whether it's fiction or nonfiction,
Yeah. So once you identify that this is going to be my take, and then once you come back for research, how long do you think that the whole process will take for you to come with the research, identify the topic, and what are the challenges at that particular point you generally face? Did at any time you feel that when I am taking this step forward to writing, am I going to find the right audience or anybody for that? Sandhya, when you came, or Mona, when you came for that, any particular challenge you were thinking of? So one of you can answer, and the other one immediately after.
Okay,
Yeah.
Sandhya can.
All right, all right. So it was a little different, right? So a little closer to home. So the way I started with was actually creating a timeline of events, and therein lay the first challenge, because we all had different ideas of when something occurred. So even my mom, my dad, and my sister and myself, we were all arguing. No, no, we were in Lucknow this time, and this happened later, and all of that stuff. So I think even that research, as you talked about, and this is so close to home when we talk about family. That's everybody knows about it, and so you have to be very accurate. So that was one thing. And also, it has to be something which is interesting to everybody. So yeah, we've recorded everything, but is it of interest to even everyone in the family? So picking those stories which reflect the timeline but are also interesting to read. So that was the next challenge, and a lifetime of 88 years with a very full lifetime. It's a lot of lots of stories over there to pick from. And thirdly, also, I think when writing about people who are still there or families, or, there's been a whole trend for biopics, you have to be really careful of how you portray not just the protagonist, but even the others, right? I think people are sensitive,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
You have to stay close to the truth. I mean, you have to, so that's the balance, right? So how do you, make sure that you are, your ethics as a writer, plus, balancing it with everybody's feelings and thoughts, and also making an engaging story along the way.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are the challenges that I have.
Yes, Mona, your take?
Yes, Chandrika, thank you. So, if the question, I guess, is regarding the challenges that
Yes.
we face as writers. Well, when it comes to my particular writing skills in terms of historical fiction or mythology or whatever, I didn't doubt myself much because I guess I had my publisher and my editor reposing 500% faith there. But I would say that, well, within me, there was that little girl, and not so little anymore at 51 almost, but many fears emerged, and they emerged like all floodgates open with my first book. So with my first book, what happened, it was a classic case of an imposter syndrome, right? Because as it is, writing about 30 or 20 years ago was basically entering into a male bastion, right? Not a blanket statement per se, but the
Yeah.
fear of upsetting somebody,
Right.
to be politically correct,
Yes.
and not to write anything which was very sexual or had an oblique towards a particular genre, right? Not of the fear of making a mistake, or being publicly shamed, of the book not being liked, because that for me as a very young writer at that time, it meant was that if a book is not being liked means the writer wasn't being liked, right? And for many people and for many women writers, that is a very terrifying situation to be in, especially for new writers.
Yeah.
So because we rely a lot on the acceptance quotient per se. And then as we spoke about research, I'll blend these two threads together. Research requires time. So the
Yes.
general perception for women writers over here is that if you are a woman, no matter how brilliant you are, how much of research you have done, writing was always perceived as a hobby, something that you do on the side. So if a
Correct.
man has a luxury to say, don't disturb me, I'm writing a paper, women do not enjoy those kind of privileges. Not in my household, but yes, generally I did see that. So for a woman who was struggling with running a business, 9 to 5 jobs, getting the bacon home, making meals for the family, supervising the kids' homework, ensuring that everybody leaves the house with their tiffin, right? At that point, writing is usually the first casualty. So
Yes.
finding time was a difficulty, and it was research which needs all the more time. So if you're going to do research based writing, believe me, you're almost dead there.
Yeah.
So, and, but at this moment, I feel there are so many publishing houses where we have women at the helm of affairs, yet women find it very challenging when they are pitted against their male counterparts when they are doing the same thing. And generally, and the third challenge I see is, why are we called women writers?
Yeah.
Everybody knows we are women. Why not just writers? We are
Right.
writers, period. You don't see a male typist, a female typist, or same thing for farming. It's only when something is considered a male domain, that is when we prefix the word woman over there. And I
Yeah.
think that is the sorry part of it. That is the challenge, which is a very objective challenge that I face, nothing subjective per se.
Yeah. So,
Also,
yeah.
I'd like to add to what Sandhya said about the ethics
Yeah.
as a writer. So she was writing about something basically in her house, and she
Yeah.
had to remain very ethical and true to the story, which would be read by people in the family. So it had to be very factually correct. But imagine writing about something that could potentially be controversial. For like mythology, there have been books which have been burnt. Writers have been exiled and denied entry into the. So a lot of when you're writing in a particular domain, such as mythology or anything else that can be controversial. I think a writer has to really make that call. Like, this is what I believe, and how can I put it across? Because everything can be misinterpreted also. So
Yes.
there's always this dilemma about my ethics. And how am I putting it out, and is it going to be accepted? And there's so much around that. You cannot just write anything and hope that you will be understood and accepted and in the way that you mean to be. And I find that a lot of writers have in the past sort of felt that they have been compromising on their voice, that I am sounding too politically correct, and but that's not me. I am not looking to be politically correct. And that's where the responsibility comes in as a writer, because at the end of the day, people will read what you're saying. You are going to be considered an authority. People will be like referencing your book. So there's that sense of responsibility also that we all have to kind of keep foremost in our mind whenever we write anything.
Oh.
Yeah, very well said. Very
well said. That's this one. But I think Sandhya had this particular thing, like she was talking about your colleagues also, I think, of your father and other aspects of it. Did you have to seek their permission and all that, the right permission, etc., when you are writing a non-fiction particularly?
Yes, so my father was in the army, so and he had a long career, fought in 3 wars, and of course various family members. So we did. So what I did, firstly, I mean, just the family, kind of thing, was just focusing on my father's life and what came out of it. So that was a little easier to manage. My father had initially written about the entire clan, but that became a much bigger project, different countries and getting reviews, that would have taken a long time, maybe, later. But I decided to first focus, okay, just my father's life. And even then, I think, okay, he did participate in 3 wars, and I almost never knew much about it. So that was another reason I was interested in writing this. And I've discovered a lot. I mean, I've lived with my father, but there's a lot that I didn't know, which I realized, maybe I was just a child or whatever. But writing it, I've discovered so much. But I think he still shared only what is okay to share publicly. I think he's done a little bit of censoring. I think they know, I think, what they can share and what they can't. So I think, when you deal with certain, things like wars and all of that, you have to either take permission, or if it is like further down, I think then you kind of have to see what is it that you're trying to project. Here, we were just trying to share my father's life story. So it wasn't any specific aspect or, any other objective in mind. But did have to kind of look at all of that, and really look at all the, the dates, and make sure they match, right? And so there is, or because, as somebody mentioned, Google is there, the internet is there, everybody can, even for a small story, they can find out. So everything has to match, right? So yeah, I think biopics are big now, and not just biopics, but even writing life stories, right? So
Correct.
Barack Obama's life story, our own Priyanka Jonas has come out with one. But it's also, I think, everybody has something to share, something you can learn in anyone's life story, and which is why it's like, I think that's when I published this, everybody can come back and said, I wish I had written about my father, or here's my mom, my mother has done something, or an uncle or an aunt. So I think that it's rich, and we have a lot of things around us, not always documented, like the everyday life, everyday people.
Correct.
We've had a lot of tradition of maybe verbal knowledge going down, but I think we can start recording some of it, and it's an
Correct.
opportunity for us because we have ready stories and plots and dialogues and everything. It's just, and it also serves some purpose or the other. So I think yeah, it becomes it's a very interesting exercise along the way.
Yeah. So because Sandhya has this one, I think one of the question asked is, what are the aspects of truth that you think can get colored when one is writing biographies and autobiographies? Yes, the natural thing will be to Sandhya, but I would like to pose it to any of you, and then we'll come back to Sandhya. Yes, what do you think can get colored, Mona or Pragya?
Pragya will answer.
Mona, yeah, what do you
Okay,
think? Like
okay.
one of the question is, yeah.
Yes. Well, of course, it does get colored because when you are writing fiction, or even it is non-fiction, when you are writing, it is a very subjective line of thought, right? And what you have heard from somebody, the kind of experiences that you have gone through, they color your perception. After all, there's a very
Yeah,
prevalent of halo effect and a Horns effect which is at play when you are trying to understand any particular event, right? For example, when you talk about history, they say history is written by conquerors and survivors, so they will justify the bloodshed, howsoever callous it was. I mean, every bloodshed is callous for that matter.
yes,
But whatever it
absolutely.
is, so everybody justifies. So what you read and what this kind of circumstances that you are placed in life, you will accept what basically makes a connection with your stance in life. For example, if I was a woman in an abusive relationship and I want to write about that, I will take in all the forms, all the aspects that come to me and write about it, and it will sound very potent. It will sound very solid to the person who's reading because it's part of my experience. So
Correct.
my judgment will be colored. But in case I'm writing about a character who was in an abusive relationship and I am not, then there are certain aspects that I just might miss there.
Correct. Yeah.
Right. And I also might end up blaming my protagonist, the character that I'm writing about, for inviting that kind of abuse over upon herself. So a lot depends upon the kind of experiences you've had, and also your sensory tactile imagery, clubbed with the kind of perception and experiences that you've had. They of course color your writing because, as I said, writing is very, very cathartic. And we imagine things in fiction, we imagine things, but if it is non-fiction, then it is based on a fact. And if you've experienced it, then I think it will lose its credibility if you try fabricating it too much.
Correct.
You cannot fabricate it; it starts losing its credibility. And my point of view as an author should be very potent, very clear, very simple, very precise, and very much to the point. And I cannot afford to get objective about things. So if I'm writing about something subjectively, I cannot accept everybody to accept my point of view. That is very important.
Absolutely.
Everybody,
Absolutely.
nobody is obliged to read and accept your writing just because you have written it.
How important is, yeah, yes, Pragya.
Actually, I'd like to add to that as well.
Yes.
Basically, Mona was saying that, a writer's personal experiences, their
Correct.
lives, it actually comes out in the writing because writing is such a personal thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Writing is very cathartic. It is very personal. And there's something that I really like to say in the field of yoga. I always tell my students that you should find the teacher who believes only in yoga. And that is the best teacher. Like a teacher who tells you, yes, yoga is the solution, and who believes that yoga is the solution to everything, all the problems that you have in life. And a teacher who has that kind of conviction, like truly convinced that that is yoga and that is the power of yoga, is the teacher who you can learn from best. So so now with nonfiction as well, a lot of people who write biographies, you can write a biography pro the character that you're writing about or the personality that you're writing about, or you could write anti the personality that you're writing about. I mean, you can have about the same personality, you can have two different points of view. But again, a great book will be that one where the writer truly believes that this person was not a good person or this person was a very good person. You'll find that kind of only from that sort of place or point of view will you get a very authentic kind of feeling coming out. You'll have a thorough research of everything that's coming out. When you try to be very objective about something, like for instance, if I'm writing a research paper for college, for instance, I'm very objective. There's hardly anything in the text which will evince any kind of emotion from you. It's a book which is only for scholars. It's a reference book. It's just that it is very, very bare. It's very bland. But now nonfiction as a genre is very colorful. And it is because it's being written by women, by writers who believe in what they're writing. So whether they, whether you're pro the personality, anti the personality, it comes out. I really believe that, you should really go for that writer or pick up that book written by a person who truly believes in what they're writing, regardless of what point of view they're coming from.
So you feel, yes.
Am I permitted to just add to something that just Preeti said? So Preeti said that, how we can make it more relatable and, by adding more color to fiction to non-fiction. The example that comes to my mind is when Malik Muhammad Jaisi wrote Padmavat, he perhaps had no idea that one day this story is going to replace historical facts. He admitted it was an allegorical tale, the story of a beautiful queen of Chittor and a luckless suitor, Alauddin Khilji, and it became part of the Rajput oral traditions, because it was repeated ever so many times with so much of conviction, with so much of such vivid details were put into it that even Persian literature speaks about Padmavat now. And now it is almost sacrilege to even say that it was fiction. So just adding to what Preeti said and what Sandhya has been saying, that this is how even non-fiction turns into fiction. Sorry, fiction turns into non-fiction.
Fiction turns into, yes.
I just want to speak about from life stories, right? So one thing is also omissions. So we may not necessarily color anything, but just you may omit certain.
Wonderful.
Right. So and
that's
yes.
Yeah.
Is it omission? Is it because you want to be politically correct, or earlier Pragya was saying that in today's world you have to be sort of more careful? Is that one of the reasons, or is it just that? What do you think is your take there?
Yeah, I mean, so I was talking about Priyanka's autobiography, right? So I think I was just looking at it because I haven't read it yet, but I was just seeing some reviews, and everyone was interested in, has she written about her affairs when she was in Bollywood, and she hasn't, right? So she's portraying probably all the things that her perception of herself and how she wants to be perceived. So that's kind of a frivolous example, but yes, that is. You're trying to portray something, and then you find all the facts that and it's factual. Nothing is incorrect or not factual. It is factual, but you have just omitted certain things.
Just I'm asking as an academic. See, when you are reading a Michelle Obama's or this one, you feel there are certain biographies you really like, and certain you feel that you're not able to relate to because you realize that it has been colored quite a bit. So by maybe omission. Yeah. So how do you take it? What is your perception of that?
Yeah. So I mean, to use a cliche like the truth shall always prevail. I think people know when it's authentic and when it's not, and you relate to that. You identify with that, and that is something that as Pragya was saying, I think if they're speaking about with fashion, you tend to go along with that. You can't fool all the people all the time, so but there are also different kinds of life stories. So I think everything is not an autobiography where you write end to end. Like memoirs are just, it could just be incidents which which have impacted the way you are. Like, so Michelle Obama is more of a memoir. Like, what has shaped her? So she doesn't need to write all the facts and events, but what has shaped her. So yeah, I think when you get into it, there are so many nuances, even just to writing nonfiction and true life stories or even mythology and all of that. I think it's important, if anybody's thinking of starting about it, is to kind of decide that, like, okay, where what are you planning to write, and come up with the scope of it, or the boundaries. There's lots on individual genres as well. And not to get confused. So if you're writing a memoir, it's fine. You can just write about things which impact you. So I
And
think
I
that would
think you have to find a target audience also, I suppose so, right? When you think about writing. I think that is a very important thing. What do you feel about it, Mona? Finding the
Yes,
right target audience?
yes, right. Finding the right target audience also, because uh, you know there has to be a certain connect with your audience, right? So if I'm not able to make that connect because they are not people who would appreciate the kind of writing that I do. So if I were to give out my Lost and Found in Banaras or God is a River or even my laughter lines to about a 15 or a 16-year-old, they will not be able to appreciate. They might even find it very preachy or very didactic. So I have to have that bracket in mind, and I also need to make sure that my publisher, laughs his way to the bank. He keeps the teller machine ringing as well. So there is a very fine tuned. It's a very fine tuned endeavor over there where I have to write the way I want to write for my kind of audience, because there is no one size fits all kind of a writing. Very few writers have been able to do that. Probably I'm not able to do it like that. I have a huge ground to cover there. But yes, you need to find your audience, and that is where you do come out with, in a very wholesome sort of way in your writing. You put everything out there because you understand that a person who's reading or is picking this kind of a book will be able to relate to what you are writing. So when I was writing God is a River, I write about this little girl over there, Bhawa, who works in a rich household in pre-partition Pakistan, and she sees this boy Yashveer who can throw away a pencil. I mean, the pencil is just halfway down, and he can throw away the pencil and say no to food. I could write about that, and somebody got back to me when I got an award and said, that character of Maua Mona, it made me cry. How real was that? You've written such a beautiful book. But let me profess and confess over here, I had not written a beautiful book. I had written from my life. I came from a very humble household, and I would go to cousin's place in summer and wonder, how can any child say no to a whole bottle of chilled Fanta? कोई मना कैसे कर सकता है? Because you don't get those sort of privileges in your life. So when I could write about Mahua from the same space, it was relatable to people who were reading my book or people who were also coming from the same things. So yes, of course, you need to find your target audience. Otherwise, if you don't know where you're going, if you don't know your goals, any road will take you there. So you need to understand your goal.
I think in this particular thing, Pragyas will be there. Like, you have to make somebody pick up your book, right? So, what was
Yes.
it that went into your whole sort of planning when you thought of it? Because that's a very important aspect when, let's say that I want to write, and there's a whole lot of books out there. So, you read a lot of your version and come up with what you are going to take? Which angle are you going to take?
Hmm. I think, what I'd like to say is that, as writers, the writing of the piece happens for us. We write because we are interested in telling the story. Now, positioning that story, positioning that book, all of that comes afterwards. Finding the audience. We don't, yeah. So there's a huge difference, between books which have been written from the heart, a story which has been told from the heart, and a story which has been told, for a particular purpose. So I think, and because I am a yoga teacher, and because I constantly read a lot of books about yoga, I think I wrote the book to answer my own questions. I was reading a lot, and I was seeing a gap between, let's say, a lot of Western interpretation of yogic stories, mythology, which is also Hindu mythology. So I was seeing a huge gap, and I felt that there was. I knew the stories from a different point of view. My outlook on my subject is very different because I'm an Indian teacher teaching in India, studying in India. So the way I tell a story is very different from the way a very good and very experienced yoga teacher from the US would, for instance. Because it's just a different culture. Because when you talk about something that you know very personally, like Mona said, it just changes the way it changes the narrative. It changes the feel, the vibe of your words, of the story that you're talking about. So I think yoga as a genre, self-help yoga, although there's a plethora of books about it, I think a lot of them have been written from the point of view of, this is what people would like. A lot of books about how to do asanas. That is what people would like. Not realizing that Light on Yoga, which is one of the best books about yoga, all-time bestseller, it's already been written. So a lot of teachers don't realize that, you're just sort of not writing from the heart. And because I was reading a lot also, I could see and sense that there is a voice that's missing, and perhaps it's Indian yoga teachers teaching in India, studying in India. Because at this point in time, yoga is sort of being appropriated by the West. There's a lot of, and it's open to interpretation whether that's good or bad. But I think there has to be space for all voices, and I found our voice missing, and that's what I've tried to kind of to bridge.
Finding a publisher, potential as far as finding a publisher for your, I think there are so many markets. So how do you go about it? For, I want to write, say, a self-help book. So how do I go about it particularly? Yes. Yes,
Will I answer?
Yeah, please.
Well, especially at this time, Chandrika, in these uncertain times, this is the best time to write a self-help book at this time. It has acquired quite a momentum at the moment because people want a very reputable source to guide them at this moment, especially now when it is time both for reflection as well as future gazing, and it is very, very uncertain. And as we said, no gainsaying, right, that non-fiction refers to the literature based on fact, and certainly is the broadest category of literature and answers many issues. And these issues at this moment during the lockdown and COVID times have proliferated like wild mushrooms. So if somebody has a problem that they want to be solved, people are going towards books more than people, right? Because they feel that what if I were to have a problem and I were to speak to my parent or a sibling, or they would get very judgmental, right? And all the blame will be directed towards me. Why do I get so angry? Because you're impatient, because you're a perfectionist, because you want to, wrap up so much in a day. All that gets to you. But these days, I would love to hear it from a book from a reputable inked source. In our fast-paced world, there is another thing. People are becoming very discerning about where they spend their time, because there's no time, and on what. And that is why if they are given a book to read, a self-help book to read, which is recommended to them, but they will still read that book, but will not tolerate anything which is sloppily written or presented badly, just as Pragya said. So therefore, a well-presented non-fiction book over here at this moment will work beautifully. And secondly, it is becoming much easier than ever to publish a non-fiction book, which has facilitated its growth. Because there are a lot of topics that can be taken up now. Wider the world, the bigger the challenges. And thirdly, I feel that India has such a rich repository of myths, legends, and folk tales, which can be passed through a different and a relatable medium. You can see these days how mythology has come to acquire such a currency. Why? Because all those stories have been passed through a different sieve, a different filter, and we even use them for our corporate coaching. And people connect with them. And you need to tell them something that they don't know. I'm sure when Pragya is writing, when Sandhya is writing, they're writing about things that people don't know. If we are writing about things that people already know, why will anybody invest even 100 rupees on our book? And how it is told. That is
Yes,
also
how it
very
is told. I think the
how it is
perspective makes a lot of a
told.
difference.
Yes, so
So,
that is where
my
stories come in even
perspective,
for
yes,
non-fiction.
yes.
People
So,
connect with stories.
yes, I think when sound, I think you people can see the thing when writing self-help, most books get into a tangent of boredom because they ultimately sound repetitive. So, when it's one writing, how can we make one book distinct from another? So it has just flashed. How can we make a self-help book distinct from another? That was the question I think Kajal has posted because of somebody else asking. Yes, Pragya, would you like to take it or Sandhya? Anyone or
I think
both, one
uh,
after the other.
like self-help books again, you have to make sure that your research about your topic is very, very thorough. You know, yes, books tend to get repetitive. After the first few chapters, which is why there is a need. Like, if you really want to distinguish, your work and your book from everything that's out there, it is important to know what is out there. Sometimes it
Correct.
is our perception that I might read, let's say, even five books about what I want to write about, and I may think that, okay, I've read everything, and I have the pulse, I have the general pulse of the readers, and this is all repetitive. But I really would encourage that you read not just five books, but read about 50 books, read
Yeah.
essays about what you want to write. Look at it from a scientific point of view. Look at it from a traditional point of view. Whatever kind of topic you pick up in within self help, because there's so much, and only after that baseline, and this is baseline research, only then will you understand, okay, where is the gap. Because there's a gap existing everywhere, because the world is vast. There's so much to write about, there's so much to talk about and to explain. There will be a gap somewhere which would resonate from you, that you would be able to write about, and you would be authentically able to convey your emotions about, or your feelings about. And so this happens only after you do that baseline research of reading papers, academic journals, mythology about the topic, scientific journals about the topic. Then you arrive to what you want to write about, and then the research starts. That is
But
what I
then,
would say.
yeah,
So I
but then I'll come back to Sandhya here.
yeah,
Sandhya, you have written an autobiography.
yes,
Okay, so it is more of a story about a biography of your father. So now, where does this aspect of reading a lot to find out the tone or language, did it work for you? I completely agree that we have to read quite a bit and all that, but in your case,
yeah.
how pertinent was it?
Yeah, so I have a slightly different perspective because, yeah, I didn't have a very specific audience because even in the family, as I said, it's across generations. So, I had to write something which spanned generations. Again, I didn't have a specific audience externally because it could, not being a celebrity book or something, it could, kind of connect with anybody. I think for me, it is going back to, there are two things. One, adding on to what Pragya said, it's about finding your voice as a writer.
Mhm.
So, and that could be, and it could be, everybody could have written the same story 100 times over, but nobody has written it quite the way you have, right? So
Yeah.
it's okay. I think sometimes even
Absolutely.
if you haven't done all that
Absolutely.
reading, it's, you do have a unique voice. It's just to kind of find it. And for me, what helped was, I think, yeah, I'm a technical writer by profession, right? So I write for a global audience. I have to write for a very generalized audience. So we have things like minimalism and writing, very simply. So I just applied all of those principles. And I also like humor. I love to read P.G. Wodehouse and all those books. So, and as it so happens, the incidents we picked out, my father was narrating, and I like, these are funny incidents. So yes, it talks about that period of time, but why should it interest somebody else, right? So it was a lot of humor that we built in. So for me, I guess that was a little bit about of my voice, but it's also about writing in a simple way, which is accessible to everybody, whoever is willing to read it.
Yes, Mona.
Just adding to what Pragya and Sandhya said. I mean, absolutely ditto them. Whatever, when it comes to writing a self-help book, I believe whatever we are writing has to be applicable to a place and the environment that we are staying in. Pragya spoke about, the yoga books which were written by people, not based in India, and people with a completely westernized perspective of yoga. So there was a voice that was required of somebody who was an Indian teacher writing with an Indian context for the Indian audience. And as Sandhya said, to inject humor into it and write in very simple tones. Sorry, very simple tones. I feel when you're writing non-fiction or any self-help book, whatever we are telling our readers, or when we are training to our audience, it should be applicable on their desk straight away. So even we're talking about something like time management, and you are just telling them you must get up before sunrise and must sleep by 8 p.m. I mean, our mothers have cried themselves hoarse and we never listen to them. I mean, this is something we've been listening to. Every child has listened to these things. But in case I'm able to tell them about the Pareto principle or the Eisenhower matrix and how that can be applied in a very simple way with a story added to make it very acceptable and relatable, it works like magic.
I think so. And I completely agree with you, Mona, in that. Yes. It makes it, we have to make it relatable. Yes.
Yes.
Never underestimate the power of organized, impeccable, non-confusing note-taking. That is very important when you're writing non-fiction, self-help. You have to have your notes in a particular order, something that makes sense to you. That is the baseline.
Yeah.
There is one question here. What points to bear in mind when writing self-help for teenagers, keeping in mind their state of rawness, fragility, and yet the greatest quality of I tried reading without my specs. Yes, inhibition. So, how do you handle self-help for teenagers? Have anybody? I think Mona, because you are into training, right? So, how would you handle this?
First of all, don't sound didactic. I mean, don't preach. Nobody wants to be told what to do. Point one, the moment you tell them you must do something like this, it just doesn't work. You've just missed the course with them. You are not able to make a connect with them. Talk to them in a way that they talk amongst themselves, in a way that they don't feel that they are listening to an authority. The moment you become authoritative, you miss it. Secondly, use a story to get your point across. Like, Anthony de Mello said that the shortest distance between truth and a person is a story. So if you have a story which a story makes a tangible difference to children per se, especially to teenagers, and they're able to relate to it, because that is the era when they are into reading stories per se. As we grow up, we don't read as much. We do more we are more into non-fiction and more into research oriented, and so busy getting the bacon home. So if you have a story there, then never use the word don't with them. The moment you use the word don't with a person, his mind goes into exactly the sphere that you are asking them not to go into. If you make it very didactic and understanding their point of view, understanding and relating to it, and also be very sure about the fact that you are never undermining them in the entire process. You have to celebrate their youth, the stance that they are in life, instead of telling them that, this is what used to happen in my times. I used to study under the lamppost. Well, I mean, that was your time. This is not their time. How can you push them to do the same thing? So life was very tough for me. Well, life is extremely tough for them because you did not have social media. For them, even if they're holding up a cup of tea in their hand, and the kind of cup that it is will also invite some of the kind of a detrimental comment for them. It's like a fishbowl syndrome these kids are under at this moment. Life is extremely tough for them, much tougher than it was for us. So never feel that, there's a sense of an entitlement when that we can tell things to people, we can preach to them. Never preach. Make things very relatable, make things very doable. something which they can apply in their daily lives straight away. Instead of making it very complicated, keep your language simple, use lots of stories, and as Sandhya put it beautifully, use lots of humor. The moment you
Yes.
can make a person laugh or make a person smile, you've forged a very deep bond with your audience or your reader.
Hmm.
Okay. So coming back to our topic as a conclusion, if somebody is wavering about should I write or should I not write, now I think I'll just ask that, then come back to the question. So, what are the three things that you would say that the present potential in about nonfiction in our country? What are the things that they can keep in mind, and what is the potential available for them? Let's say that they are wavering between can I go into nonfiction writing? Pragya, in
I
your
think,
opinion.
yeah, in my opinion, right now it's a great time to write nonfiction.
Yes.
Thankfully, because of COVID, a lot of people are reading a lot more. You know, people are downloading books a lot more. So, despite the fact that bookstores are closed, we have seen a huge spike in people buying books on the Kindle online. And I think a lot of people who are not used to reading fiction or don't enjoy reading fiction, they definitely like to read fiction. Even people in the corporate strata, they're reading the Bill Gates autobiography, and they want to read about the people who are in the limelight in today's times. People want to read. People are curious. People want to explore. People, there is that sense that there's an urgency to travel, to see new things, to experience new things. So, because of that, I think the potential for nonfiction, but well written,
Yes.
very kind of nonfiction with a certain perspective.
Right.
I think there is a huge audience for that.
So
So, because we are
this,
reading a lot more, we are also very discerning. So
yes.
I think there's a huge potential. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. And Mona, what would you like to tell the audience who wants to write, and what is your greatest advice or suggestion? Suggestion, I would say, not advice.
Well, at this moment, I feel that, not at this moment, perhaps, India has such a, as I said earlier, India has such a wide and a rich repository of myths, legends, and folk tales, which can be passed through a different and a very relatable medium to make it very popular. And it is amazing to see and discover the vast appetite that people have over here in our country at the moment. So one can always go on to write non-fiction and also make it very, very interesting. For example, so many, Sandhya would relate to this when I talk about people writing autobiographies or people writing biographies of
Biographies.
even film stars. So any Bollywood buff, would certainly enjoy a blockbuster, any movie from Gulzar, but will be very curious to read about what made Sampuran Singh Kalra
Yes.
Gulzar. What was that
Correct.
journey all about? What made him the culturally, the literally rich person that he is? Or look at the other book. Another example that comes to my mind is Tavleen Singh's Darbar. On similar lines, it talks about the lives of the Gandhis before they came into politics, especially Sonia
Politics.
and Rajiv Gandhi. Now, people do not know about those
About that
hidden
life.
facets, right? So even if
Absolutely.
you're writing non-fiction and you give them access into those hidden facts, right?
Yes.
Then people, you have reached out to them with
That's a
all
fantastic.
relatable, all shades of gray thrown in. It is very important. There are some beautiful books out there by women writers, since it is out and out of women panel. Manjul Bajaj's The Search of Heer. Look at the story of Heer and Ranjha passed through a completely different medium where their voices are heard through a crow, a pigeon, or a goat that was a witness to their love life. Minnie Wade's The Magnificent Women and Their Flying Machines. When she talks about the women who spearheaded the Mars Orbiter mission, the MOM mission, right? And she's telling us about the inside stories of these women. The faces,
That's
everybody knows about the mission, everybody knows about those scientists, everybody knows about Gulzar that he today is, everybody
yes.
knows about the Gandhis that they today are. But tell them something that they don't know. So
Nothing.
if you are able to tap that pulse, you've tapped the right nerve there.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Yes, Sandhya.
Yeah, so I think I had already mentioned that Suhail from the Book Bakers, right? He had said that that's nonfiction is really what the publishers are looking for now. I think, as Pragya said, I mean, yeah, shops are still closed, bookshops and all of that. So the publishers are still a little slow on picking up fiction books. So, but nonfiction, yes, I think that's selling. Self-help, as Mona mentioned in this day, people are looking for what kind of help, or how can I, get through today, and all of these things. And there is a lot of potential because there are enough stories around you,
Yes.
far away, anything which can be research very accessible. So those stories are there to write. And also, I think that, as it's been coming out, the potential of, translating it to, let's say, a web series or a TV series or a movie, right? So I think there is an additional thing which publishers also, at the end of the day, they have to do something that makes sense for the business, right? So I think nonfiction definitely is huge right now. And if people are willing, I think this is a good time, to pick up nonfiction, keep working on fiction in the background. The time of that will come. But right now, I think the time is for nonfiction.
Yeah. And I think I'm going to sort of wind up with what Sandhya said in the beginning, that, there are stories around with the people around you. Start, talking to human library. It's like,
Yeah. Yes.
talk to people around you first. Maybe you never know what you're going to come up with. So I think that was, and looking at the newspaper, looking at various other aspects, etc. I'll just find out whether Kajal has any more questions to pose. I think they liked, yes, delving into the subgenre of food. We see such a surge of food related literature that is coming out. Why do you think that is? How is suddenly food gaining such value or interest? I think Pragya should answer this because she is into yoga and naturally food comes next.
Yes, and that is exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Ironically, when a lot of new students inquire about classes, and if that student is coming to yoga or fitness to lose weight, they're coming to a yoga teacher, but they're hoping for some easy food-related advice. How can I just lose weight really quickly? What should I eat? What should I not eat? Tell me what can I eat to make yoga better? What can I eat so that yoga affects me more, becomes more effective. So I think because food is again in the health genre, I think a lot of people are interested in food because we may not exercise daily, but we're eating daily.
Yes.
And therefore making changes to your diet are a little more accessible for everybody. Now it is possible to make those changes, but are people making those changes? That's a whole different topic. But I think people do feel that if they could find out a few easy changes that they could make every day, then they could live better, which is actually true. What we are, what we eat, and there's so many great books out there about food, particularly like the Indian way of eating, the Ayurvedic way of eating. And people are becoming more interested in health, and food and health go hand in hand. And I think, that's why people are interested.
And they were cooking more during the lockdown anyway.
Yeah.
Yes. I think that is one of the reasons. Any other queries, Kajal? What are the aspects of any other question? Yes, Kajal is here. Kajal, it's mute.
I do this all the time. I mute myself and then completely forget about it. So yeah, most of the questions came from me because I really am very interested in this genre of writing because it's such a vast plethora of subjects that you can explore when you're writing nonfiction. There's politics, there's law, there's crime, there's there's food, there's beauty, there's fitness, there's health. There's like a plethora of subjects that one can really explore, and therefore it is one of my favorites to kind of look forward to because I read a lot of biographies. I love biographies, and I read a lot of self-help books also.
And one of the things is a happiness project nowadays. Happiness. Everybody wants to be happy.
Happiness, yes. So, and I think there is, as Pragya said, there's nothing better than being truthful. So if there is some truth that people can really kind of relate to and kind of associate themselves with, I think that's the best option that one can go ahead and give in the form of literature. Like Mona said, we all want to go ahead and find stories that we can connect with. So I think it was a very engaging session. I thoroughly enjoyed this discussion. I would really like to thank our moderator Chandrika for helming this session because it was done so beautifully. Of course, I can't let go of the beautiful panelists of authors that we have here who actually shared a piece of their experience here for us so that we can take it forward. I'm sure whatever we have discussed here is going to be of great value to whoever was listening to us. It was a massive, massive show today. We got almost about 70 odd people on the live streaming. And that was great. Yeah, and that was great. Thank you so much for making time for the session. It was our honor to host you, and we look forward to many such sessions with the authors in the coming time. For now, this is going to be our last session for Pen Connect with Women Authors, and we look forward to all your responses in the comments. Whoever is listening to us right now, please go ahead and share any further questions. We'll pass them on to the authors. I think Mona wants to say something.
Yes, Mona.
Yeah, very quickly, I'm just reminded of something when Pragya was talking about food. There's such a deep connection between food and writing. There was something I read for all those who understand Hindi very well, and I'm sure all of us must understand our mother tongue well. And it says, लफ्जों के भी जायके होते हैं जनाब, चख कर परोसना चाहिए.
That's absolutely correct. Every word needs to be that apt flavor which can be taken forward by the consumer. And I think on that note, I will go ahead and say thank you again and wishing you a very good night, everybody. Thank you so much for making time for us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, lovely connecting with you, Pragya, Sandhya, Chandrika, and
wonderful.
Kajal. Thank you for having us. Bye-bye.
Thank you.